What if everything you believed about weight loss was wrong? Not slightly off, completely, fundamentally wrong. What if the reason your diet failed, the reason the gym didn't work, the reason you counted every single calorie and still couldn't shift the number on the scale, had nothing to do with your willpower, your discipline, or even the food itself? What if the real answer was hiding inside your own body the entire time, running silently in the background like a program you never knew was installed? Here's the truth that most people in the health and fitness world don't want to talk about. You don't gain weight because you eat too much. You gain weight because your hormones tell your body to gain weight. And once you understand that, really understand it, everything changes. Think about it this way. Your body doesn't do anything by accident. You don't grow taller unless your growth hormones tell you to grow taller. You don't go through puberty unless your hormones trigger that process. You don't sleep, wake up, feel hungry, feel full, feel stressed, or feel calm without a precise hormonal signal firing somewhere in your body. Every single process, every transformation your body undergoes is orchestrated by hormones. They are the chemical messengers that run the entire operation. So why on earth would weight gain be any different? Why would fat storage be the one exception to that rule? It isn't, and metabolic expert Dr. Jason Fung has spent years making that case. Not just theoretically, but with clinical evidence, patient data, and research that is impossible to ignore. According to Dr. Fung, the primary hormone responsible for fat storage in the human body is insulin. Not excess calories. Not fat in your food. Not carbohydrates in isolation. Insulin. That one hormone is the gatekeeper between you and your ideal weight. And most people walking around right now have insulin levels that are chronically, dangerously elevated, and they have absolutely no idea. So let's talk about what insulin actually does. When you eat, your body breaks down the food into its component parts. Carbohydrates get broken down into glucose, simple sugar, which enters your bloodstream. Your blood glucose rises. Your pancreas detects this rise and releases insulin into the bloodstream in response. Insulin's job is to act like a key, unlocking your cells so that glucose can enter and be used as energy. That's the system working exactly as it should. Eat, glucose rises, insulin rises. Glucose enters cells, insulin falls back down. Clean, efficient, balanced. But here's where the problem starts. When you eat too many refined carbohydrates, the kind found in bread, pasta, rice, sugary drinks, processed snacks, and basically most of what lines the shelves of a modern grocery store, your blood glucose doesn't just rise. It spikes, hard and fast. And your pancreas responds by releasing a massive surge of insulin to try to manage that spike. Over time, if this keeps happening meal after meal, day after day, year after year, your cells start to become desensitized to insulin's signal. They've been bombarded so many times that they stop responding as efficiently. This is insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is where everything starts to fall apart. Because now your pancreas has to produce even more insulin to get the same job done. Your blood glucose stays elevated. Your insulin stays elevated. And here's the part that almost nobody talks about. When insulin is high, your body is physically incapable of burning stored fat. Insulin is a storage hormone. When it's present in high amounts, it signals your body to store energy, not burn it. You can run on a treadmill for an hour. You can eat nothing but salad. But if your insulin is chronically elevated, your body will not dip into its fat stores. It can't. The hormonal environment won't allow it. This is why so many people exercise relentlessly and see almost no results. This is why so many diets fail in the long run. They address calories. They address macros. But they never address insulin. And insulin is running the show. Now here's where things get genuinely exciting, because once you understand that insulin is the key variable, you realize something remarkable. You don't necessarily have to overhaul your entire diet to start making a difference. There are specific, research-backed strategies that can significantly lower your insulin response without requiring you to give up the foods you love or completely transform how you eat. These aren't gimmicks. These aren't hacks in the cheap clickbait sense of the word. These are physiological levers, small, intelligent adjustments that work with your body's own biology to produce meaningful, measurable results. The first one is so simple it almost sounds too good to be true. And yet the research behind it is rock solid. It has to do with the order in which you eat your food. Not what you eat, not how much you eat. The order. In 2015, a team of researchers conducted a study on patients with type 2 diabetes, people who were already taking metformin to manage their blood sugar. They gave these 11 patients the exact same meal, identical ingredients, identical portions, identical total calories. The only variable was the sequence in which the food was served and eaten. In one condition, patients ate the carbohydrates first, bread and orange juice, and then, 10 minutes later, they ate the protein and fat, skinless chicken breast, a salad with vinaigrette, and steamed broccoli. In the other condition, it was reversed. Protein and fat first, then 10 minutes later, the carbohydrates. The results were staggering. When carbohydrates were eaten last, peak blood glucose dropped by 54%. Not 5%. Not 10%. 54%. And the insulin area under the curve, the total amount of insulin the body was exposed to over the course of digestion, dropped by 48%. Nearly half. From the exact same meal. The exact same food. Just eaten in a different order. Let that sink in for a moment. Because what this means is profound. You are not just what you eat. You are what you eat, in the order that you eat it. And that order has a dramatically different effect on your hormonal response. But why does this happen? What is actually going on inside your digestive system when you flip the sequence? The answer lies in how digestion works at a mechanical and enzymatic level. And it's far more interesting than most people realize. When you eat protein and fat first, they don't just sit there waiting for the carbohydrates to show up. They actively change the digestive environment. Protein triggers the release of specific gut hormones that slow down how quickly food moves through your stomach and into your small intestine, a process called gastric emptying. Fat does the same thing. So by the time the carbohydrates arrive, the bread, the rice, the pasta, whatever it might be, they are entering a digestive system that has already been primed to slow things down. Think of it like a highway at rush hour. Normally, if carbohydrates arrive first, they zoom straight through. Rapid digestion, rapid glucose absorption, rapid spike in blood sugar, rapid insulin surge. But when protein and fat arrive first, they create what you might call a traffic jam. The carbohydrates that follow get stuck in that jam. They move slowly. They are absorbed gradually. And the result is a slow, controlled, gentle rise in blood glucose instead of a sharp spike. Your insulin response is measured, not massive. And your body stays in a much more favorable metabolic state. There's another benefit to this approach that goes beyond blood sugar and insulin. When you eat protein and fat at the beginning of a meal, your body releases a hormone called GLP-1, glucagon like peptide 1. You may have heard of GLP-1 recently because it's the hormone that drugs like Ozempic are designed to mimic. But your body produces it naturally. And one of its primary functions is to signal fullness. When GLP-1 is released, you feel satisfied. The cravings quiet down. The urge to reach for something sweet after your meal, that almost automatic post-dinner sugar craving that so many people struggle with, it simply doesn't arise with the same intensity. Because your body is already telling you it's had enough. This makes the food order strategy uniquely powerful for people who struggle with overeating or emotional eating. Because you're not white-knuckling your way through a meal, resisting temptation, fighting your own biology. You're working with your biology. You're setting up the hormonal environment before the carbohydrates even arrive, so that by the time they do, you might not even want them. And if you do eat them, your body handles them far more efficiently. The practical application is beautifully simple. Start every meal with your protein and your fat and your non-starchy vegetables. Eat those first, take your time, and then, ideally after waiting at least a few minutes, have your carbohydrates. If it helps to think of it like a restaurant meal, imagine the protein and vegetables as your appetizer and the carbohydrates as the main course that arrives later. That small gap, even just 10 minutes, makes a measurable difference according to the research. And over weeks and months, that difference compounds into something significant. Now let's talk about the second strategy, because this one involves a pantry staple that most people already have in their kitchen, and yet almost nobody uses it with this intention. It has to do with pairing carbohydrates with organic acids. Organic acids are naturally occurring compounds found in a wide range of everyday foods. Lactic acid is found in fermented products like yogurt and kefir. Acetic acid is the active component in vinegar. Fatty acids are present in olive oil and butter. And what these acids have in common, beyond their chemistry, is their remarkable effect on carbohydrate digestion. Here's what happens at the molecular level. When you eat carbohydrates, the digestion process begins in your mouth. Your saliva contains enzymes called salivary amylases, and their job is to start breaking down starch into simple sugars right from the moment food enters your mouth. The faster those enzymes work, the faster the carbohydrates get broken down, the faster glucose hits your bloodstream, and the higher the resulting spike. Organic acids interfere with that process. They inhibit salivary amylase activity, effectively hitting the brakes on carbohydrate digestion right from the very first bite. The breakdown slows down. The absorption slows down. And the glucose that eventually makes it into your bloodstream does so gradually and gently, instead of all at once. The numbers here are just as impressive as the food order research. Take bread, for example, a food with a glycemic index of around 71, which is considered high. When you eat that same bread with butter, the glycemic index drops to around 50. When you eat it with olive oil and vinegar, the traditional way that bread is often served in Mediterranean cuisines, the drop is similar. That's a reduction of nearly a third in the glycemic index, simply by adding a fat and an acid to the same food. No elimination, no restriction, no willpower required, just a smarter combination. This is why the Mediterranean habit of dipping bread in olive oil and balsamic vinegar isn't just a culinary tradition. It's metabolic wisdom that has been practiced for centuries without anyone necessarily understanding the biochemistry behind it. The olive oil slows the digestive process because the intestines now have to deal with fat alongside the carbohydrate. The acid slows the enzymatic breakdown in the mouth. Together, they fundamentally change how that bread affects your blood sugar and your insulin. And the practical applications extend far beyond bread. Dress your rice with a splash of apple cider vinegar. Add a generous pour of olive oil to your pasta. Pair your starchy meals with a side of full-fat yogurt. Have a small glass of kefir before or alongside meals that are heavy in carbohydrates. These are not radical dietary changes. They are small additions that leverage your body's own chemistry to produce a dramatically different hormonal outcome. From a weight loss perspective, this strategy works through the same fundamental mechanism as the food order trick, by lowering insulin. But it also contributes to something equally important: extending your body's natural fat-burning window. When your blood glucose rises slowly and falls slowly, the period of time between meals during which your insulin levels are low, and therefore during which your body is free to access stored fat for fuel, becomes longer. You are essentially extending your metabolic fasting window without actually fasting. Your body spends more time in fat-burning mode simply because its insulin environment is calmer and more controlled. And that leads us to the third strategy, one that requires no dietary changes whatsoever, costs nothing, and can be started today. It is arguably the simplest and most underutilized metabolic tool available to every single person on the planet. A walk after eating. Not a marathon, not a gym session, not a high-intensity interval training circuit. Just a walk. A relaxed, comfortable, 10 to 30-minute walk taken shortly after a meal. The timing matters enormously here, and the research is very specific about this. In one study, participants who walked immediately after eating saw their post-meal blood glucose drop to approximately 5.6 millimoles per liter. Participants who walked before the meal, their blood glucose after eating sat at around 6.5, essentially unchanged from what you'd expect with no exercise at all. Walking before the meal did almost nothing. Walking immediately after the meal produced a significant, measurable drop. The participants who waited 30 minutes before walking saw results somewhere in the middle, and the longer they waited after that, the less benefit they received. The window of maximum benefit is tight. Immediately after eating is when the walk has the greatest impact. Why? Because your muscles are the primary consumer of glucose in your body. When you move your muscles, they pull glucose directly from your bloodstream to use as fuel. So if you take a walk right after a meal, right when your blood glucose is beginning to climb, your muscles start consuming that glucose before it has the chance to trigger a massive insulin response. You are essentially giving your body a natural, physiological glucose sink. The glucose gets burned off by your working muscles rather than stored away under the management of insulin. Think about what most people do after eating. They sit down. They lie on the couch. They watch television. They scroll through their phone. Every one of those behaviors sends a clear signal to the body. We are in rest mode, in storage mode, in energy conservation mode. And the body obliges. It stores. It hoards. It packs that glucose away as fat under the direction of elevated insulin. But a 10-minute walk flips that signal entirely. It tells your body, we are in activity mode, in energy burning mode, and your muscles respond by doing exactly what they are designed to do. They consume glucose, they lower blood sugar, and they reduce the insulin response needed to manage that blood sugar. Over time, this has a compounding effect on insulin sensitivity as well. Regular movement after meals teaches your body to handle glucose more efficiently, making your cells more responsive to insulin signal, which means you need less insulin to do the same job, which means lower baseline insulin levels across the board. Lower baseline insulin levels mean your body spends more time in fat-burning mode. More time each day, every day. Not dramatically at first, but consistently, reliably, cumulatively over weeks and months. Now let's zoom out and look at all three strategies together, because their combined effect is greater than the sum of their parts. When you eat protein and fat first, you slow the absorption of carbohydrates and trigger GLP-1, which reduces hunger and cravings. When you pair your carbohydrates with organic acids and healthy fats, you further blunt the glycemic impact of those carbs and extend your natural fat-burning window between meals. And when you take a short walk after eating, you actively burn off the glucose that does enter your bloodstream before it can trigger a large insulin surge. Each strategy targets insulin from a different angle. Together, they create a metabolic environment that is dramatically more favorable for fat loss. Not through deprivation, not through suffering, not through white-knuckling your way through hunger, but through intelligent, biology-aligned adjustments to the rhythm and context of eating. And here is perhaps the most important point of all. These strategies, followed consistently, don't just help you manage your current diet better. They gradually change your relationship with food in a way that happens almost automatically. When you front-load your meals with protein, fat, and vegetables, you naturally feel less hungry. When you feel less hungry, you naturally eat fewer carbohydrates. When you eat fewer carbohydrates, your insulin levels drop further. When your insulin levels drop further, your body becomes even better at burning fat. And when your body is burning fat efficiently, your energy is more stable, your cravings are weaker, and you feel naturally less driven to reach for the foods that were causing the problem in the first place. It becomes a self-reinforcing cycle, but a positive one. A metabolic virtuous cycle instead of the vicious cycle that most people are unknowingly trapped in. The math, when you look at it clearly, is striking. If eating the exact same foods in a different order can reduce your blood glucose spike by 54% and your insulin exposure by 48%, What does that mean for someone who eats 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year? It means their insulin environment is profoundly, fundamentally different from someone eating those same foods in the conventional order. And that difference, compounded over months and years, translates into meaningful differences in weight, metabolic health, diabetes risk, energy, inflammation, and longevity. This is not about perfection. You don't need to do all three things at every single meal, every single day, forever. What you need is consistency over time. Start with the food order. Make that a habit. Once it feels natural, start adding vinegar or olive oil to your carbohydrate-heavy meals. Once that becomes normal, start taking a short walk after dinner. Each change is small. Each change is sustainable. And each change stacks on top of the others to move your metabolism in a direction that serves you. Dr. Fung is clear that this is not a rapid transformation. You won't lose 10 kilograms in a week following these strategies. That's not the point. And honestly, rapid weight loss is rarely sustainable anyway. What these strategies offer is something more valuable. A gradual, comfortable, effortless shift in your metabolic baseline. As your insulin levels normalize over weeks and months, the weight begins to move. Not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily. And because the underlying hormonal environment has actually changed, that weight stays off. Because you're not on a diet, you're not restricting, you're simply operating in alignment with how your body was designed to function. The excess weight that accumulates with chronic high insulin is not a character flaw. It is not laziness. It is not a lack of willpower. It is a hormonal response to a hormonal problem, and it has a hormonal solution. One that doesn't require you to suffer. One that doesn't require you to give up the foods that bring you pleasure. One that simply requires you to understand how your body works and make a few small intelligent adjustments to work with it rather than against it. Eat your protein and vegetables first. Pair your carbs with olive oil, vinegar, or fermented foods. Take a walk after you eat. That's it. 3 simple shifts. And the biology does the rest. Because here is what nobody tells you when you start a weight loss journey. The hardest part is never the first week. The first week you have motivation. You have novelty. You have the excitement of beginning something new. The hardest part is week 4, week 6, week 10, when the novelty has worn off, when life gets busy, when you're tired and stressed and the last thing you want to do is cook a carefully planned meal or drag yourself to the gym after a long day. That is the moment when most diets collapse. And they collapse not because the person failed, but because the diet itself was built on a foundation of restriction and willpower, which are finite resources that eventually run out. What makes these 3 strategies different, fundamentally, structurally different, is that they do not ask anything of your willpower. They do not require you to resist temptation, because you are not removing anything from your plate. They do not require motivation, because the habits themselves become automatic within weeks. Eating your vegetables and protein first becomes as natural as reaching for a fork. Adding olive oil to your bread becomes instinctive. Taking a short walk after dinner becomes something you actually look forward to, because you notice how much better you feel, how the post-meal sluggishness fades, how your energy stays level, how the 3 p.m. crash that used to derail your afternoons simply stops showing up. And that improvement in how you feel is not incidental. It is the direct result of stabilized blood glucose. When your blood sugar spikes and crashes repeatedly throughout the day, it creates a hormonal roller coaster that affects everything: your mood, your concentration, your energy, your sleep, your stress levels, and your cravings. Every crash triggers a stress response that makes you reach for something sweet or starchy to bring your blood sugar back up. And when you do, the cycle repeats. Spike, crash, crave, eat, spike again. Most people live in this cycle every single day without realizing that the fatigue, the brain fog, the irritability, the constant hunger, all of it is being driven by unstable blood glucose and the insulin chaos that underlies it. When you start flattening those glucose curves, through food order, through acid pairing, through post-meal movement, the roller coaster begins to smooth out. Your energy becomes more consistent. Your hunger becomes more predictable and manageable. Your cravings, particularly for sugar and refined carbohydrates, begin to lose their grip. Not because you are suppressing them with willpower, but because the physiological trigger for those cravings, the blood sugar crash, is no longer happening with the same frequency or intensity. This is the hidden reward of optimizing insulin that most people never experience. Because most weight loss programs never address insulin at all. They focus on the surface, calories in, calories out, eat less, move more, without ever asking why the body is storing excess energy in the first place. And the answer, almost always, comes back to the same place. Hormones. Specifically, insulin. There is also a longer-term dimension to all of this that is worth understanding, because the stakes extend well beyond the number on a bathroom scale. Chronically elevated insulin, the kind that results from years of high carbohydrate, high glycemic eating without the metabolic management strategies discussed here, is not just associated with weight gain. It is associated with type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, polycystic ovarian syndrome, certain cancers, accelerated aging, and cognitive decline. Insulin resistance is now understood to be one of the central drivers of what researchers call metabolic syndrome, a cluster of conditions that dramatically increase the risk of serious, life-threatening disease. This means that every meal where you choose to eat protein first is not just a small act of weight management, it is a small act of disease prevention. Every splash of apple cider vinegar on your food is not just a glycemic trick, it is a contribution to your long-term metabolic health. Every post-dinner walk is not just burning a few extra calories, it is actively improving your insulin sensitivity, reducing your cardiovascular risk, and protecting your brain. Small actions, practiced consistently, with an understanding of the biology behind them, become something much more than habits. They become a form of medicine. Preventive, gentle, side-effect-free medicine that your body already knows how to use. And perhaps most importantly, these strategies are accessible to everyone. They do not require a gym membership, a nutritionist, an expensive supplement stack, or a complete kitchen overhaul. They do not discriminate based on income, fitness level, or cooking ability. A person eating a modest diet of rice, vegetables, and protein can implement the food order strategy starting from their very next meal. A person who has never exercised in their life can take a 10-minute walk after dinner tonight. A person who has struggled with their weight for decades can add olive oil and vinegar to their bread tomorrow morning. The barrier to entry is essentially zero. The only requirement is awareness, knowing that these levers exist, and understanding why they work. That is what makes this approach genuinely empowering, rather than overwhelming. You are not being asked to be perfect. You are not being asked to overhaul your identity or your lifestyle overnight. You are being given 3 simple, science-backed tools and invited to use them, at whatever pace feels manageable, in whatever combination works for your life. Because sustainable change never comes from dramatic overhauls. It comes from small, consistent shifts that accumulate quietly over time, until one day you look up and realize that everything has changed. Your body, your energy, your relationship with food, your health. And you can't quite pinpoint when it happened, because it happened so gently you barely notice. That is the promise of working with your hormones instead of against them. Not a dramatic before and after. Not a transformation powered by suffering. Just a gradual, steady, almost effortless return to the metabolic balance your body has been trying to find all along.